Episode number 70, Being a Christian Dad in the Midst of Significant Change with Dale Kreienkamp. Have you ever been unemployed? Statistically speaking, you are more likely to be unemployed at some point in your life than you are to having cancer. Each year, over 20 million people go unemployed in the United States. Oftentimes, it's a silent journey, especially for men. As men, we have a certain pride in the work that we do. And then when we lose a job, we often experience feelings of inadequacy, failure, and worthlessness. Thus, we tend to not talk about the experience and don't get the support needed to make it through that difficult season in life. Author Dale Kreienkamp knows firsthand what it's like to lose a job. He has served his time in the unemployment ranks and has come out of it a better man and well equipped to help others through the difficult journey. From the shame that can accompany unemployment to the roller coaster of emotions to the impact of unemployment on your family and faith life, even to getting back into the job market, Dale shares with us his experience, his wisdom, and his sage advice. Listen in this week as Dale shares about this often overlooked topic for men. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well. All right, Dale, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad we're having the opportunity to connect and to talk a couple things about unemployment and when change happens in life. So, Dale, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about your background, your context as a Christian husband and father, so guys can get to know you better.
Absolutely. So, born and raised in the St. Louis area, I am the second of three sons, and I've been married for 41 years to the love of my life, and I was blessed to have three sons. And those three sons have now blessed my wife and I with 5 grandchildren. And boys run in the family, so the first 3 grandchildren were boys. Finally got that little girl. And so I'm a blessed father and a blessed grandfather at the moment.
Awesome, man. Congratulations on the 41 years of marriage. I'm looking forward to logging that many years myself. My wife and I just celebrated 15 years a couple months ago, and that was quite a milestone for us. We were really excited. And but 41, that's pretty awesome. Well, Dale, why don't you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write your book? You have a book. Tell us a little bit about why you wrote it.
Yeah, so my story goes back, the story of the book really goes back about 16, 17 years ago. My professional background has been the world of human resources. I was a corporate executive. And in 2003, I had been with a large hospital for 25 years. And we were getting ready for an organizational restructuring. And I was updating my boss on all of the things that he needed to be aware of as we were eliminating the jobs of 26 people. And at the end of that, he stood up and looked at me and he said, "Oh, by the way, Dale, your name is on the list. You can leave today, or you can finish off this project and leave next week. Thank you very much," and walked out the door. So for the
Wow.
first time in my life, I was unemployed. So I stayed through the process that we had created to make sure that we took care of those 26 people, and I became the 27th to make that happen. When that was done, I began looking for a job, which I hadn't done for a long time, but it's not like I didn't understand job searching, having a professional background in human resources. But I also knew this was new territory for me, so I went out looking for where is something that's going to guide me spiritually. So my faith has always been an important part of my life, and I didn't find anything. So there are books about how to find a job if you're divorced, if you are in a situation where you have cancer, Alzheimer's. There's books galore, but there's nothing that spoke to people who were unemployed. And so I began to write some devotions thinking, you know what, there needs to be something for those folks. And then after about a 10-month search, I went into consulting. God bless that for 5 years. I was hired out of consulting by a client, and I worked there for 10 years. And then I again went to have a conversation with my boss, who said, "We're eliminating your position." And when it happened the second time, I realized, all right, I've got a story to tell, because one of the things about unemployment, Patrick, is that people don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
People keep quiet. If you think about it, when you were in high school, if you didn't make the basketball team or you didn't get the part in the school play, you didn't want to tell the whole world. You kind of kept that to yourself. You're a little bit embarrassed about that. And so nobody talks about it. And so I wanted to give back to those people who were going through the challenge, so that they, first of all, knew others had been through that challenge with them. And I really wanted to help them in their spiritual journey, because for many people, they might not have as close a relationship with their God. And this is an opportunity that God draws us close together when we go through tough times. And so I wanted to help them with providing help, hope, and healing in the process. And that's where the book came from. And we released it November of last year, 2018.
Cool. Cool. So did you start writing these devotions while you were unemployed, or after you gained some employment, you were reflecting back and thought, "Oh, I should write some devotions"? What was the kind of the timetable there?
Yeah, so the first drafts were written when I was unemployed. And so they were based upon, I journaled throughout my unemployment. So I just kind of went back to the journals and memories. And then when I actually finished off the book, that was all done while I was unemployed. Uh, so it was all very personal and right there.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. So you mentioned something that, um, nobody really likes to talk about being unemployed. Why do you think that is?
You know, so much of our self-worth is often tied up in what we do as a vocation. Most of us, when you get introduced to somebody, the first question somebody will say is, "What do you do?" And so our identity is tied up in what we do. And when you don't have that, there's really a loss of identity that people struggle with. And if you're not certain who you are, if you're struggling with identity, you're going to retrench rather than go outward. And so people just hope this is a little blip. They'll keep quiet, go find another job, and then they'll tell the world, "Yeah, I had this period of unemployment, but it's all good now." And so I think it's usually just the identity and the ego that really get caught there.
Yeah, you and I were talking a little bit before the recording, and I'd put a post in the Dad Hackers Facebook group about, what was some of the struggles of being unemployed. And a lot of the members commented on that. And there was a common theme of struggling with identity, whether it was self-esteem or feeling worthless to their family or to themselves or to their wife, or feelings of failure, like they failed their family, they failed themselves because of the unemployment. And so, Dale, what was one of the hardest things for you when you became unemployed?
Truly, I would say it goes back to the identity part for me. I
Mhm.
was tied up into that. I loved what I did. I loved the organization. So there were two issues that I dealt with. One was identity, and the other was loss of community. Um, I'd been in an organization for a long period of time, knew a lot of people, had a large team. And if you stop and think about it, even if you are a construction worker on a work site, or you work in a shop, work in an office, you probably every day walk in and you'll say hello to 5 to 10 people just on a normal day. When all of a sudden you become unemployed, people aren't around. You're not as connected as you used to be, and people don't necessarily always reach out to connect with you. They're uncertain where you are, how you are, and so instead of saying something, they tend to say nothing. So you spend a lot of time alone and in isolation. And I'm an extrovert by nature. I love people, and so that was hard for me to not be part of a community. And then my self-worth was way too tied up into what I did for a living.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would expect that for extroverted people, when they lose the job and lose the community, um, that can be very difficult for them because they're people. They like to be around people. They like to be social. And when you lose a job and you're just sitting at home, kind of twiddling your thumbs, so to speak, you lose a lot of that. And another thing I was thinking of as you were talking there was, in a lot of workplaces like a construction site, or even what you're doing, lots of times you work on teams, and or you have to work collaboratively with others, and you go through hard times with people. And when you go through struggles with people, I've noticed you build a bond with those people and through those experiences. And you see this with soldiers in wartime, in times of conflict, or you see this with servicemen and women, firefighters, those types of things, where they really develop this strong sense of community. And then, Dale, when you lose your job, boom, a large part. I mean, how many hours a day, how many hours a week, how many hours a month are you spending at your job with those people whom you've gone through struggles with, and now that's gone. You know what I mean?
Yes. And for them, it's really hard to have a conversation to talk because your common bond was work. And now you don't work at the same place, so you don't necessarily want to hear all the stories about the challenges they're facing at work. What you want to hear about is how they're doing personally in their life. So it's really awkward even when you have those conversations. So for many people, and I talk to a lot of people who've been unemployed, and they'll say the hardest was the loss of those relationships because um, people don't reach out, they don't stay connected. They say they will, but they don't, and so it's really a significant loss for people.
Yeah, and I've noticed that um, type of situation come up where you have a sense of community because you have a common. You're doing something in common, whether it's a job, whether it's church, or whether it's some kind of recreational activity. And then whenever you stop that or move on to something different, lots of times the relationships that you've built in that context, often those fall away, and that can be um, very difficult. So when you became unemployed, you ended up with a lot of extra time on your hands, and some people in the group also mentioned this, having all this extra time kind of, and you get a little stir crazy. Uh, and I would imagine for multiple reasons. Number one, you're just not working. Number two, you're probably waiting to hear back from um, application that you've sent out or interviews that you've had. And number three, it's like it's kind of hard to start something if you don't really, if you're future's kind of up in the air. So how did you handle having the extra time on your hands while you were not employed?
Boy, what an absolutely great question, Patrick, because time is one of the biggest challenges that people in a job search face. Time is a gift. So, on one hand, you are given the opportunity to do things you normally didn't have time for. Time with your family, time to just relax, time to read, maybe a project around the house. But it's also conflicted time because you're also saying, well, wait a second, I need to find a new job. And so how do I do both? And so you you often feel guilty because if I'm spending all my time trying to find a job, then I'm saying, but wait a second, here's the opportunity to be with family. And if you go spend the time with family or doing things you like, you're saying, but wait a second, am I missing out on something that's going to get me a job? So it's a very conflicted time.
Hmm.
I worked hard to try and build a rhythm into the day and into the week itself. A friend of mine who had his own business kind of pushed me in this direction, and he said, Dale, you need some different types of days. And so I had what we called focus days, where I really spent the day focused on the job search. Those were the days I tried to get as many appointments as I could, did my follow-up phone calls, sent out whatever I was doing in the job search. I worked certain days during the week that were what I called focus days. And then the other days were kind of what I called flex days, which just meant I certainly tried to fill those up. But if somebody called and said, hey, let's have lunch today, or can you golf this afternoon? Um, if I didn't have anything on the schedule, I took the freedom to say yes to those sort of things. And then I also tried to put in days off where I just said, I'm not going to look at email. I'm not going to touch this. And those are really hard to live by, but I did my best to do those. So I tried to build a schedule because I work better with a schedule.
Hmm.
It keeps me productive. And so it kept me from just sitting around relaxing, doing nothing, which felt bad. So I created my own schedule and my own rhythm.
That's awesome, Dale. I really like that because I can see like you're no longer working full time. So now you have all this time on your hands. And like you were saying, you're conflicted. Like you have extra time and you want to spend it with your family or spend it doing this or that. But then if you do this or that, now you're thinking, well, I should be looking for a job. Uh, but then when you're looking for a job, just back and forth that mind game. But if you treat your job search kind of like a full-time job is what it sounded like, or even a part-time job where you have set hours where you're actively searching for a job, and then you have recreational time or you have free time built into your day, and you set up those boundaries in that structure, I could see that really helping you to live more freely and not have that internal conflict of I should be doing this or I should be doing that, because you have those times blocked off in your day and in your week. So did you find that was maybe like a turning point in your unemployment period whenever you began to do that schedule thing?
So I wouldn't say that it was a turning point, but it helped me the most to just give myself permission that it was okay to have the time off.
Hmm.
I think it comes, Patrick, from the belief that we think we control more in life than we really do. And when you go through unemployment, you find out you control almost nothing in life. And because of that, our faith needs to be in God, not, gee, am I working X number of hours? And so when we start to relax and say, God, I'm going to give this to you and give myself permission to enjoy this time with my grandkids or to enjoy this time with a friend, it becomes a little bit easier. But we fight the old Adam who still wants to think we control and we need to be doing things.
Yeah, very, very well said, Dale. Very well said. What would be some of your advice for let's say somebody's been in the workforce for 10, 15 years and they're totally out of the trying to find employment game, and now they find themselves unemployed, and things have changed so much over the past 10 or 15 years. They it's like I don't even know where to begin to look. type of thing. What would you say to that guy about how to kind of just begin the job search?
So the first thing I tell anybody in the beginning of a job search is you need to pause and you need to stop and ask, what are my gifts? What do I like to do? What do I have fun? Where do I get my joy in work? Sometimes people find out that they really haven't had a lot of joy in what they've been doing. They've been earning a paycheck and they felt that was the most important thing. Well, when you're unemployed, you have a chance to kind of reset, hit the reset button and do something different. So I always ask people, just start with, what are my gifts? What are my skills? What do I enjoy doing? And that's the first place that I tell them to go. Then what I encourage them to do is begin the process of networking. Networking doesn't always have a good name for people because they think, gee, what do I have to give anybody else? I'm just asking for people's time and they know I'm looking for a job. But it's important that you get out actively and meeting people. And so an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody else who gets to know you, who can introduce you to somebody else. And so begin that process of networking. And the other one that I found was really helpful is you have to tell the world that you're unemployed. And that's really hard to do, Patrick, because again, it's like I said, it's announcing to the world that I got cut from the basketball team. But when you let people know that you are unemployed and looking, you'd be amazed how many people that you know might say, hey, I need you to meet so-and-so who's a friend of mine, or I just heard about a job. If people don't know, they can't help you. And I have found people really want to help. I've seen the goodness in people and they want to help, but they need to know. So start with, what do you love to do? Get yourself out there meeting people through a networking process and make sure you let the world know, as uncomfortable as that is, it's an important part of the process.
I really like those 3 steps, Dale. I'm curious about the second one, but before we jump into that, I just wanted to make a comment on the third one about tell the world you're unemployed and looking, because I could see that your reputation would play a big part in how that's received. Like if you're a man of your word and you're a man of character and integrity, and you're a hard worker and you fulfill your commitments and you're on time and those types of things, I could see it working well for you. People are going to want to introduce you to new people. People are going to want to open doors of opportunity for you. But if you've been not living up to par, so to speak, and you've been untrustworthy and your character hasn't been on par, I could see that kind of going the other way where people are like, uh-oh, so-and-so's unemployed again. And so it just made me think, like, all the more, it's important that we as men live lives of integrity as best we can. And you said it well, ultimately God's in control of everything. We can only do so much. And when you're unemployed, you really realize how much God is in control and how much you are not in control. But this process of networking that you mentioned, what are when you say that process of networking and get out there and meet people, what do you see people saying and doing in order to begin the networking process? Like, take us down that path a little bit.
Sure. If I was just talking to you, Patrick, and you told me you lost your job, one of the things I would say is I want you to make a list of people that you know well. They might be personal friends. They might be business associates that you've had work relationships with. And just go through that list of people and kind of categorize them. So I always say, type A's are the people that are pretty well connected in the business world. Those are the people you'd love to get a chance to meet first if you can, but not to the exclusion of other people, because we don't often know where the connections are going to come from. I have a friend of mine, a young man who actually started his career working for me, and when he was between jobs, I asked him about how he found his job, and he said, Dale, I met a person who was a scientist, and he asked if I could help with his resume. And I said, sure. I had some time. And so his background was human resources also. He helped the scientist with the resume, and the scientist said, I don't know how to say thank you to you, but my next door neighbor happens to work in human resources for this company. Can I introduce you? And he said, sure. And it was through that introduction that he got his next opportunity. And I've talked to people that their opportunity came from somebody they knew from their church who introduced them to a friend in a different company. So even though I say, let's try and break it down for who might, you want to just start getting to people. And in that conversation, it's an opportunity to share a little bit more about yourself. And it's an opportunity to share what you're looking for in the process. It's easier for those of us that are extroverted. So my wife is an introvert. The thought of her she just said, Dale, I couldn't do what you're having to do. And what I tell to the folks that are a little bit more introverted is just start with people that you know well. It can be just a close friend, and sit down and explain what you're trying to do. They understand that it's not the easiest thing for you. And in the end of every conversation, you want to say, is there somebody you can introduce me to as I try and broaden my network? And I have always found people are usually very good at saying, yes, there is. Let me try and connect you.
All right, guys, just wanted to give one quick announcement and then we'll be back to the show. I wanted to invite you to take a look at our Ironman Mastermind membership. Now, this is an opportunity for you to lock shields with a band of brothers in Christ. The guys in the group already have been giving me some amazing feedback, things like they find great encouragement as a husband and as a dad. That they find that this group of guys is dedicated to helping them become the man God has designed and created them to be. They feel like it's helping them thrive as men, and just lots of good feedback. So if you're looking for a place where you can share, be real and share your victories, share your struggles, you're looking for a place where other men will push you and cheer you on and help you grow as a dad, as a husband, as a business person, as just a man in Christ, then you might want to check out the Iron Men Mastermind. All right, guys, back to our show. Awesome. So, my mind, whenever when I start thinking about the job search, I immediately think of like searching classified ads in the newspaper or monster.com or some kind of online clearinghouse for, job searching. And I think that's all well and good, but I really like this whole idea of networking, because you're tapping the resources that you already have around you. And like you said, with the scientist guy, you never know who somebody else knows, who's, one or two people away from them. And I heard it said that most people on average know 1,000 people. And then each of those people know 1,000 people. And so if you do the math, I mean, what's that? That's like 1 million people that are one step away, one relationship away from you that you have within your reach. And so I could see how networking is just so very powerful to opening up doors of opportunity.
And Patrick, it's a way to personalize in some way what has become a more impersonal employment process. So you mentioned that, if you go way back, you'd fill out letters, resumes, you might take it into an office and hope to see somebody. And today, everything's done electronically, and some search engine is going through all the data, mining it, and giving the recruiter, here are the top people you should talk to. And those systems do a good job of identifying certain things. But if I met you somewhere in a networking conversation and there's an opening in my organization and I liked you, when I take your resume down to the hiring manager and say, this is somebody you should talk to, that jumps to the top of the list. Yeah. Because it's personal, it's a connection. And so it's your opportunity to get out and connect with people and get some advocates that might help you. And you don't know who knows who or how many. I have a friend who I told him, I said, Gary, you're my best referral. He said, Dale, I only introduced you to 3 people for cups of coffee. And I said, yeah, but Gary, those 3 people have introduced me to about 18 different people, because each person knew somebody else differently. So that one little spark can grow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I teach high school math for my full-time job, and whenever our school has positions open, they of course post them in the appropriate places, but they'll usually send out an email asking if you know anybody who would be a candidate for that job. And I can't tell you how many people have gotten hired with our school just based on that, not just from me, but other people. And if you know 2 or 3 people in an organization and they all have good things to say about you, I mean, you're right. Your application goes right to the top of the stack, and you get a lot more credit to your name, if you will, than just if somebody just read your resume and just saw, oh, you have all these wonderful credentials. But if you have somebody else that's in the organization and vouches for you, man, that just does wonders for your reputation there.
And because of that, one more thought I'll just share, Patrick, about networking is people can get overwhelmed. So it is exhausting for people to get out there and do it. So just continue to try and increase what you're doing. So you might meet 5 people in 1 week and be exhausted from that. That's okay. Next week, try and get to 8. The following week, try and get to 10, and keep trying to get it up there in terms of the number of people, because the more people you meet, the more connections that you can make. And it takes time. So take it one step at a time.
Right. Very good. And I could see that this networking approach could apply in many different areas of life, not just when you're looking for employment, but I could see it applying in so many different ways for different things that people are trying to do or whatever it may be. One thing I wanted to ask you, Dale, was you're a father. You mentioned you're a grandfather as well. Can you talk to maybe the family impact of unemployment, or what it's like to be a Christian dad in the midst of significant change or unemployment in like the family life and all those dynamics?
Sure. Wow. So it's significant. One of the things that is important to do is to be honest and to be transparent with your family about it. And so I can still remember having to have the conversation with my wife and with my kids that said, I don't have a job. And that makes a change for them. So it impacted them as much as it impacted me. Their problem is they're on the back end of it. I'm the one living it in the middle, but it impacted them. And so I needed to be honest. I also had to remember that they're watching, especially my kids. They're watching, how does dad deal with adversity? What does he do in reaction to this? So does dad badmouth his old employer? Is dad angry? Is dad resilient? Does dad do what a Christian person should do when they're going through a situation like that? So they're watching all the time. And so it became important for me to just remember, I'm a living example to my kids. I'm teaching. It's a teachable moment. And as hard as it is for me, it's an opportunity for me to teach. Now, the first time that I went through it, my kids I had 2 in college and 1 in high school. Those are what I would call heavy cash flow years.
Yes.
Going out the door. But it was also so they were older and they could understand things better. And so I needed to be honest with them and say, here's what happened, and here's what this means for me. And I tried to keep them updated as we went through the process of what was going on. you have to be able to laugh at yourself. I still remember there was a time when we were during the summer and we didn't have a car for everybody. And so we were talking about cars for the next day, and there weren't enough cars to go around. And one of my sons looked and said, well, how come the guy that doesn't have a job gets a car?
Oh,
And they all looked, there's like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? And I just chuckled and said, you're right, and laughed at it. Well, then they all laughed. I gave them permission. It's okay to tease dad. So how can I not be sensitive to things, but be open to laughing about the things that happen? Um, this most recent experience for me when I lost my job was probably the more challenging for my wife and I, because I really invaded her space. So over the last 15 years since I'd first been unemployed, um, grandchildren came into life. And my wife has been blessed to be able to spend 2 to 3 days a week with grandkids. So it's just a grandma day with each of the grandkids. Well, they were at our house a lot, which meant I was in her space. She and the grandkids were often in my space. And we didn't communicate really well about that. She certainly got tired of me saying, now, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And so we realized we're playing space invaders and we needed to communicate better. And so we created a shared schedule. So I had never had her on my calendar that I keep on my phone, but I made sure that we had a shared calendar. So she knew where I was, I knew where she was. And so I could plan around it. I knew days that she was out, if those were days I needed to focus on something. And so we had to do that together. We had to be honest about finances. We had to have conversations about, is this something we really need to do now, or is this something we can put off? And I think it's really important, especially with younger kids. And again, my kids were older. But if you're not talking about it and you're not honest about it, they're going to get even more scared. So it's, how can you be real honest and say, mom or dad has lost their position, and that means I'm going to be around the house more, but I'm looking for a job. We're fine. These sort of things happen in life. God's going to be with us. And we have all sorts of opportunities to reassure our kids how we're doing, and then also remind them that God's part of this process.
Dale, one word that I've heard you say multiple times in your answer to my question there, and that was an excellent answer. I know that was a big question that I asked, was the word opportunity. And I think that's a total mindset shift for a lot of people when being unemployed, because that's a negative thing, being unemployed. But you have an opportunity there, if you have children, to be a good example, to teach them how to, how, like you said, how you face adversity. It's an opportunity for you to communicate on a more deeper level with your wife. Like, you guys had to have a shared schedule. And that's something you never had to do before, because you had your own work schedule and she had her things that she would do while you were at work. And now you guys are, like you said, playing space invaders. I thought that was a pretty neat way to put that. A question I have for you, and this is coming from a personal point of view, is, so a number of years ago, I had a voluntary job change by my own volition. And it resulted in me taking a pretty substantial pay and benefits cut. And it really put a lot of stress and pressure on our marriage and on our family. And looking back, knowing what I now know now, I would have probably approached it differently, still tried to make a transition, but do it in a different way. And my wife and I still refer to it as the dark years, when it was a really difficult type of transition. And I know that a big piece of it was the financial aspect. And whenever the finances aren't there to sustain your level of living, it can be very, very difficult. You can feel loss of security. It can really, really affect the marriage relationship, and thereby affect the whole family. So that's kind of a long-winded way leading up to my question, Dale, is like, how do you reassure your family, especially if you're the primary breadwinner? Like at our home, my wife stays home. We homeschool our kids, and I'm the primary income. How do you keep the hope alive, so to speak, in the marriage relationship whenever you're in the midst of this unemployment or significant change in this type of area?
Boy, I wish I had a perfect magic answer for that.
I know, right?
I've just found that, yeah, I've just found that we needed to openly talk more than we did before. And we also still needed some permission. So even though I was unemployed, I still needed permission to be able to spend some money if I went and played golf with my friends to go have drinks afterwards. My wife needed to know that she had permission to still do whatever fun things there were with the kids. But we had to talk about still the big things, how are we going to make sure that the mortgage is taken care of? What are the expenses we can put off? It just forces more conversation for folks. But it is a problem. I always am amazed. I have a friend of mine who had lost his job about 8-9 months ago and had struggled to find a new job, and he just landed a new job. And one of the things he told me is, Dale, we'd been praying about this, and we had used up all the liquid savings. We'd borrowed the little pieces that we could. And of course, right at the end of that's when God came through with the new opportunity. And so I do think that God is just watching us as we go through this process. It's a test to see, where do we put our trust? And he's not necessarily early, but God's always on time.
Amen to that. I'll tell you, when we went through that transition period, that was, the prayer life between my wife and I was when it was at its peak. Multiple nights per week, we were on our knees, on our faces buried in the carpet, crying out to the Lord. And it's kind of interesting. It seems like right at the last minute is when I got a job offer to do something different that would put me back in a place where we were a lot more comfortable and able to better provide for my family. And I know that it doesn't always work out like that. Some guys, they pray for a long time and are still praying now and still haven't walked the whole way through the time. Another question I wanted to ask you, Dale, was when people are in a season of unemployment, sometimes it's hard for them to get going again. Like what keeps people who lose their job from being able to move forward? Because that is a life-altering event, and we talked about how it can shake you to your core. It can really inflict you. It's your identity and your self-esteem. And sometimes it's hard to move forward. What do you think keeps people from being able to move forward in those types of situations?
I think people often get stuck looking backwards. And by that, I mean, they might have anger at their past employer because, this happened to them. It could have been the loss of a job that they enjoyed that really no longer exists. So if you stop and think about it, General Motors recently announced some significant layoffs and plant closings. A lot of that's due to technology. So if you had one of those jobs, it's not like you're going to go to Ford or Chrysler and find the same job because there are less of them. And sometimes we spend our time grieving that loss and we can't get out of that. We can't get past it. And so we really have to get to a time where we really embrace the change and say, okay, this is going to be different. And then we have to kind of reframe it. I need to be open. And I lived it myself, Patrick. So I wanted to go. I was the top human resource executive for my organization. And so I said, I'm just going to go find another top human resource executive job. But when there's one in any company, there are less of those. And as I went along the path, I started to say, well, what else can I do? And I had friends that said, Dale, you've always talked about consulting. You're built for it. Why don't you do it? And it took a while until finally God spoke to me through enough people that I said, I'm going to do something different and open myself up. And I think that's one of the challenges we have. We hold on to what we've done and we can't see what possibilities might be out there.
Mm.
And once I decided to go into consulting, God opened all sorts of doors that I didn't even know needed to be opened in order for me to be successful in my consulting practice. All by just saying, let's do something different. So for many people, they have to reinvent themselves. They have to say, what can I do differently? What skills do I have? What do I love to do? And how can I make a living at that?
Yeah, I could see that being difficult, especially if you're in the same field for multiple years, decades even. Constantly you're identifying yourself as I'm a top level HR executive. I'm a top level HR executive or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you find yourself without a job, and then you find yourself in a market that may not demand that set of skills, or you might not be able to find something. And you're so stuck on that train of thought that I'm a top level HR executive, that it's hard to see that, you do have other skill sets, you do have other things available, and you need to be able to tap into those. So, Dale, as we kind of wind down here, I wanted to ask a couple questions toward the end about supporting the unemployed person, because, there's a significant number of people that are unemployed, but I would say even more so, people know other people that are unemployed. So from your standpoint of being a person who has been unemployed multiple times now, how can friends and family extend support to the person that's unemployed and their family as they kind of walk through that season in their life?
Yeah, so if you know of somebody that's unemployed, one of the first things that I say to people is make sure that you take time to pray with them and pray for them. That they're going to need prayer throughout this process. And if you're with that friend or family member and you're saying, let's pray together about this, it's a good reminder to that person. And I think that becomes really important. You need to stay connected with those folks. So if somebody is unemployed, as we said earlier, they go through a period where they've lost the connections they had before, so they're often isolated. And so they need people to be connected to them. And that just doesn't mean once. That means somewhat regular. Check in with them on a weekly basis. How are you doing? What can I do to help you? Stay connected with them. As they go through the process, they need encouragement, and they also need to be praised, not for results. So we don't control what happens. We only control the effort that we make in a job search. I was born and raised in the Lutheran Church, and Martin Luther, in one of his explanations of something, started it out saying, I cannot by my own reason or strength. And he went on with that. Well, that's true in the job search. I can't by my own reason or strength create a job, make someone interview me, make somebody hire me. I can influence them, but I don't control the outcome. And so for people to remember, there's nothing wrong with someone if they just haven't found it, but if they're actively out there searching and they're continuing in that process, praise that type of effort for them.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's important to introduce them. So often people forget the people that they know. And so make sure that you make an introduction. And there's two ways to make an introduction. The easy way is to say, you know what, I'll send an email to my friend and copy you in on it. And then you can just send them an email and try and set up time with them. Well, that's an easy way, but it doesn't really help your friend. So take a moment to call your friend, say, I've got somebody that I know who is looking for a job. They're trying to do some networking. Would you be willing to have a cup of coffee with them? And if they say yes, then when you connect the two of them, it's going to be much easier for your friend. So help your friend in the introduction. And probably the last thing is just help them to be useful. And usefulness can happen in a lot of different ways. whether it's they've got a skill, maybe they've got a skill with their hands in terms of construction around the house, and you've got a project that they can come help you with. People have a need to feel used and to be helpful to others. And so when people aren't, and so if you have a way to help somebody be useful, that's going to be really important. But don't preface it with the statement of, well, since you're unemployed and you have time on your hands. They know that. They don't need to remember that. And probably one other thought that I'll share with you, Patrick, is the number of people that are unemployed is really significant. So in this country, last year in 2018, 21.9 million people lost a job they didn't want to lose. So that's a layoff, a discharge, a job elimination. So they didn't walk in and say, I'm retiring, I quit. 21.9 million people.
Wow.
Now you compare that to cancer. There are only 1.7 million people that were diagnosed with cancer last year. So you have a far greater chance of losing your job than contracting cancer. And I can give you all sorts of other indicators. Unemployment is huge. And if we look at the height of the recession, it was only about 27.5 million. So it's about a 20% swing from the best economy in, the last 50 years to the worst economy. We just have a lot of churn in the job market. So chances are good that most people in your audience are going to go through that period of unemployment at some point, or they're certainly going to have a good friend or a family member that does.
Yeah, those numbers are pretty staggering. It's hard to even just wrap your mind around how much almost 22 million of anything is, whether, it's people, money, heads of lettuce. I don't know. That's just such a staggering number that there's that many people. And I've never heard it compared to the cancer rate either. And that, because it seems like everybody is getting cancer or has cancer or had cancer. Or is it high risk for cancer? But here, I mean, it's way more likely that you're gonna be unemployed at some point in time.
So I'll give you a visual on that 21.9 million. That's the size of the state of Florida. Everybody that lives in Florida. That's about 21.9 million people.
Wow. That's a lot. Wow.
And that's every year. That's not just 1 year. That's every year. We've had over 20 million people every year for over 2 decades.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Dale, it's been a pleasure talking with you and picking your brain on this subject of unemployment and how it really, really hits home, I would say particularly with men, and even more so with men who have families and children that depend on them. It could really be a low blow to you. So Dale, if guys want to get in touch with you, or they want to grab a copy of your book, How Long, Oh Lord, How Long, what's the best way to connect with you and with what you're doing?
Patrick, thanks for asking. Go to my website, which is howlongolord.org. And there's a way to reach out and connect with me. Would love to connect with anybody. There's an opportunity to purchase the book. In addition to that, there is an opportunity to sign up. I do a weekly blog that tries to talk about issues related to transitions in life, because unemployment is just one of the many transitions that we go through in life, and how do we deal with transitions, especially in work. And I have an opportunity to do that.
Awesome. And I'll definitely put the links for your website and everything in the show notes after for when it's posted. One final question, Dale, before we wrap up. And I like to ask this is kind of going in a different direction, but I like to ask this of all my guests. So in your opinion, Dale, what makes a great dad?
A great dad is one who cares deeply about his spouse and his kids and wants to be part of their lives. And he also wants to be an example for them, because kids learn more just watching mom and dad than they learn from all the teachers. And I know you're a teacher, but they learn more from mom and dad than anything else. So being a good dad is just being a living example of being good with their kids.
Awesome. And I totally agree with you. You have the most influence over your children than anybody else is the mom and the dad. And that relationship that you have in front of them is so very crucial. And your relationship with them, obviously, is very crucial. So Dale, thanks again so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your insight and your wisdom and your experience that you've shared. And I just hope and pray that the things that we talked about are able to hit the hearts of men that need to hear it when they need to hear it and is a help to them. So thanks again for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Patrick, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
All right, man. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, gentlemen, there's our show with Dale Kreienkamp. Thanks for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you and that you leave this episode better equipped to handle life when significant change occurs for you. Now, I wanted to quickly remind you that enrollment for the Ironman Mastermind is open and we're accepting new members. If you're looking for a group of Christian men to lock shields with who will sharpen you, challenge you, and help make you more of the man that God has designed you to be, then you might want to take a peek at what we have going on in our Ironman group. Head on over to the show notes at dadhackers.us/070. You'll find all the links you need to connect with our guest, Dale Kreienkamp. And while you're there, you'll see a link for the Ironman Mastermind. Go ahead and click on that, and you'll be able to hear from actual members of what it's like to be part of our group and additional info of what all we have going on in the Mastermind. All right, gentlemen, until next time, remember Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.